What would it take to make a convinced skeptic completely change their mind about everything? This is a story about that exact journey. A journey from confident atheism to a life of faith. My guest today once believed there was no good reason to believe in God. Let's start there. What held you back for so long? Honestly, I just never saw a compelling argument. The ideas I encountered seemed weak. I'd hear people say a loving God wouldn't allow suffering. I learned that evolution had supposedly made faith obsolete. I watched popular documentaries and shows that mocked religious belief. One film argued that Jesus was just a myth, a recycled story from older legends. I absorbed all of that. On top of the intellectual doubts, my personal experience with believers was negative. The most vocal ones were shouting on street corners about hell. I wanted no part of that. So, between the unconvincing ideas and the unpleasant messengers, atheism felt like the only rational choice. My family wasn't religious either. We might have owned a Bible, but it collected dust. Faith was never a topic of discussion. Without any positive example at home, and with negative ones outside, my disbelief solidified. I became actively opposed. I'd use the arguments from those documentaries in debates. I enjoyed poking holes in the logic of Christians I met. And honestly, it was too easy. Not one person gave me a satisfying answer to my real questions. They were stumped. That's a powerful observation. It highlights a huge issue. When critics only interview unprepared people, it creates a false impression. It's a biased tactic, but it works because so many people are unprepared. That's a major problem. Our culture is full of tough questions, and often, the responses are embarrassing. That's a key reason for this channel's existence. So, what changed? What was the first crack in the wall? Was it a person, a book, or a sudden moment of clarity? It began when I met my future wife. She had a church background but had drifted away. When we got married, she felt a pull to return to her faith. I agreed to go with her, but my motive was skeptical. I thought, I'll go, see what it's about, and maybe show her it's not based in reality. The people seemed kinder than the street preachers, but I still thought it was just a hopeful story, not truth. My frustration grew. I decided to convince her it wasn't real by asking the hard questions. She didn't have the answers, but her conviction didn't waver. That persistence made me curious. Then, an algorithm offered me a strange gift. A video by an astrophysicist, Hugh Ross, appeared in my feed. It was about the compatibility of science and the Genesis account. I watched it skeptically, but by the end, a thought struck me: maybe there's something to this. That tiny crack led me to pick up the Bible she'd given me. For the first time, I read it not to criticize, but to understand. That started a deep dive. I discovered apologetic. I read books by scholars like William Lane Craig and Timothy Keller. I examined other worldviews. This wasn't a quick shift, it was a 3-year intellectual investigation. I was still deeply skeptical throughout. Near the end of those 3 years, my biggest hang-up was emotional, not intellectual. I couldn't accept a God who would condemn someone for honest doubt. The barrier wasn't in my head anymore, it was in my heart. My wife suggested I speak with a theologian, a friend of her family. I wrote down pages of questions. I was ready for a debate. I walked in, armed with objections. But every time I asked a question, he answered thoughtfully from Scripture. The intellectual ground was giving way. At the end, he looked at me and asked a simple, direct question: "So, do you believe it?" In that moment, with my objections addressed, I had to be honest. I said, "I think I do." The full weight of it hit me on the drive home. The evidence was overwhelming. I realized my last obstacle wasn't a lack of proof, it was a refusal to surrender. I didn't want it to be true. Letting go of that control was the final step. In the car, I finally yielded. Later, the core message of the gospel clicked. I saw my earlier objection was flawed. God wasn't sending me away, I was walking away from a hand held out to me. Understanding that truth led me to fully commit my life. It's fascinating that the intellectual agreement came first, then the personal surrender. Can you pinpoint why you were so resistant? Looking back, it was about control. My life felt good on my own terms. Accepting God meant relinquishing that authority. It's the oldest struggle, my will versus a higher will. Pride versus humility. So, what happened after that surrender? How did you go from new believer to making a film about this journey? At first, I was just excited to learn everything. I studied the Bible and theology voraciously. But I was a quiet believer. I didn't share my faith. I even hesitated to use the label Christian because of its baggage. I knew the answers intellectually but feared I'd fumble explaining them. A single moment shattered that hesitation. I got a call that my grandmother was dying. At her bedside, I felt a burning urge to talk to her about faith. But fear silenced me, fear of my family's reaction, fear of the moment. She passed, and I carried the regret of my silence. I vowed never to miss another opportunity. That vow changed everything. I started conversations. I discovered most people, even skeptics, are eager to discuss life's big questions. I also talked to many churchgoers who were woefully unequipped to explain their hope. The need was glaring. I worked in film, mostly on horror projects. I wanted to create something meaningful but thought Christian films were low quality. My wife had the brilliant idea, make a documentary about the evidence that convinced you. I emailed the authors I admired, Hugh Ross, Frank Turek, others. To my shock, they agreed. I filmed 36 hours of interviews with experts, aiming to answer every tough question I'd ever had. Condensing it into a film was a 3-year labor of love. The final product is designed to challenge assumptions and spark curiosity. It meets people where they are, using a language of inquiry rather than doctrine, because so many have been given a distorted picture of what faith truly is. That approach is so crucial. The film unpacks the cultural myths, like the idea that evolution eliminates God, which is a profound category error. Where can people find it? It's on all major platforms: Amazon, Apple TV, Google Play. My website has links and additional resources from the scholars. The film isn't the final word, but a conversation starter, a tool for churches and small groups. I encourage everyone to watch, share it, and let it open a dialogue. If this conversation about truth, doubt, and discovery resonated with you, please support this channel. Hit the like button and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more deep dives into life's biggest questions. What's the biggest hurdle keeping someone from exploring faith today?